Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Empower Hour Veterans Day special. I am your host, Glynis Chester, and this is your series that provides in-depth discussions on issues that are forefront in today's culture. We give you the tools to speak with authority on important topics in today's political landscape. We want you to be in the know every day. Today's program is very special, and I think you will love it as much as I do. While Memorial Day is a time to remember those who gave their lives for our country, Veterans Day honors all veterans, those who have served in their country in war or peace, dead or alive, although it's largely intended to thank living veterans for their sacrifices, and that's what we're doing today. We're going to talk about honoring our veterans. So, how can we do this? How can we each honor and preserve the memories of the veterans that we know and love? You'll get to know a retired officer, one of our Federation sisters, and learn about an armed services project that you and your club can be a part of. But before we get to the good stuff, we're going to go over a little bit of housekeeping. Today's program was pre-recorded, so we will be unable to answer questions in the chat as we normally do, but you can always email your inquiries directly to me at glynis@chesterfamily.net. You should have my email from your invitation to this Zoom, and I will recap it at the end as well. I will reply to you ASAP with all the answers. And I want to give a huge shout out to Erica Watley. She serves as tech for our program, and we wouldn't be able to do these without her. So today it is my great pleasure to introduce our first guest, who has also become a very dear friend to me. Monica Kozlowski is a member at large of the National Federation of Republican Women. She serves as the director of NFRW's Region 7 and advisor to the Bylaws and Armed Services Committee. Monica is immediate past president of the Indiana Federation of Republican Women, the GOP chair of Pike Township in Indiana, and the past president of the Greater Indianapolis Republican Women's Club. Monica, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Glynis. I really appreciate the chance to share information about the Veterans History Project with the National Federation of Republican Women. And this is one of many projects that are available to our members who want to help honor and pay tribute to our military veterans. To begin, I will be giving a brief background about the project and how our members can participate. And then we'll actually have the opportunity to conduct an interview of one of our NFRW sisters who's a veteran. The United States Congress unanimously passed legislation back in October of 2000 to create the Veterans History Project. This authorized the Library of Congress American Folklife Center to collect, preserve, and make accessible personal interviews and accounts of American military veterans who served from World War I to present. The idea was to encourage individuals to interview veterans in their lives and their family members, their friends, and to help preserve the stories of our service members from a grassroots level. So future generations can learn directly from our veterans and have a better understanding of actually what took place from their personal perspective. At the time the VHP started, I was working for Senator Richard Lugar, who was a Navy veteran and was very supportive of this project. He asked his staff to assist with interviewing Indiana veterans, and I was very grateful for the opportunity. Senator Lugar, being a Navy veteran and a founding partner of the VHP, and with all the partners that we gathered throughout Indiana, was able to submit approximately 10,000 interviews of Hoosier veterans to the Library of Congress, and it was truly an honor to be part of that project. Many of the interviews that are currently at the Library of Congress are audio and video recordings, but the VHP also accepts memoirs and collections of original photographs, letters, diaries, maps, and other historical documents from veterans who served in the U.S. Armed Services. The VHP also collects oral histories with Gold Star family members who lost a loved one who was serving in the armed forces during a period of war. Currently, there are actually more than 113,000 interviews in the VHP collection, with submissions from every state and includes the U.S. territories. The VHP relies heavily, though, on volunteers, both individuals and organizations like the NFRW, throughout the country to contribute veterans' stories to this project. At this time, I'd like to share my screen to to show how our members can actually help participate. Perfect. If you go to www.loc.gov/VHP, this is the screen that you'll see. If you click on the About the Project tab, which we're not going to do right now, you will learn more about the Veterans History Project itself. But I'd like to just draw your attention to how to participate. When you click that tab, it really shows you 4 easy steps about how to go about doing this. Number 1, you'll want to print the project field kit. Here's where you'll find all of the forms that you'll need. And they've actually updated this through the years to make them fillable forms. But the field kit, you can see underneath where it says individual field kit fillable forms, it lists there all of the forms that you'll need to conduct one interview. I just want to point out real quickly, see the biographical data form, that's where the veteran will fill out their information and history and their time of service. The 2 forms that are really vital for the veteran and interviewer to complete are the release forms. The veteran release form authorizes those who are conducting the interview to share their information with the Library of Congress and for the library to actually house their data. And then the interviewer release form is the person conducting the interviewer, and they're just acknowledging that they did conduct the interview. And then you can see the other forms that are there that you'll need to complete. They're not very cumbersome. They're usually 1 or 2 pages. And certainly the Library of Congress staff is on standby anytime you would need assistance. Let's go back to the screen before this. Number 2, preparing for the interview. Here's where you'll find a nice outline that reminds you of what you need to do for each interview. You'll complete the forms that are necessary, and then you'll think, okay, I need to figure out which questions I'm going to ask the veteran that I'm interviewing. So in order to do that, there's actually the interview outline under number 2, and that'll just go through and sort of help you. Let's go ahead and click on that, the interview outline. Because some of you might be a little concerned about what would I ask a veteran and where will I go for that information. This very clearly shows you want to highlight the biographical details. You can ask your veteran some of these questions, and during their early days of service, you don't have to ask all of these questions, and some of these questions will be answered as you conduct your interview. But you'll be going through just to make sure that it's a nice guide for you to make sure that you're hitting all of these points. And during the time of service, remembering that not every veteran actually deployed. I mean, every veteran has their own contribution to service. So each one will be different, but this is a great guide for you to go through and just maybe ask some of these questions during your interview, including the end of service. Maybe what was the most important time? What was a special memory? This is a wonderful resource. Let's go back to the other screen. Okay. Let's go ahead and now number 3, conducting the interview. Let's look at number 3. So when you begin your interview, you'll want to begin by saying who you are and that you're part of the NFRW if you're conducting this interview as part of the Armed Services NFRW program. And just give some information about what day it is, where your interview's being conducted. You can do your interview in person or choose to do an interview like we're doing today. Thank goodness for Zoom. You'll also want to ask the veteran to share a little bit of information about themselves when you begin, where they were born, sharing information about which branch of service they were in. And then you'll begin your questions and refer to some of those questions in the outline that we just visited. Okay, let's go back to the previous screen. And then number 4, actually sending your collection to the Library of Congress. And again, this is going to vary depending on what type of media you used, where you were sending the information, if you're doing it digitally or hard copy. So again, I would suggest reaching out to the Library of Congress just to confirm the most appropriate form of sending in the information, but certainly there is their mailing address. There is an actual staff in place to assist with this project specifically. So I definitely would encourage you to reach out to the Library of Congress, and you can do that through this website or just by calling their information, and their phone number is also available on the loc.gov website. Okay, so this gives you a quick background and helpful tips about how you can conduct an interview. And as you can see, it's not as difficult as it may seem. I do encourage you to participate. Now, as I mentioned, we have the opportunity today to interview one of our very own members, our NFRW sister, Cecilia Tyler. Cecilia serves as the Armed Services Committee Chair for the NFRW, and it truly is my honor to interview her today. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Monica Kozlowski. I'm the NFRW Region 7 Director, Member at Large, and currently an advisor to the Armed Services Committee. Today is Tuesday, November 1st, 2022, and I am in Indianapolis, Indiana, conducting this interview by Zoom. Joining me today is veteran Cecilia Tyler. I believe Cecilia is sitting in San Antonio, but I'm going to let her share where she's at with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you. I'm actually right outside of San Antonio in Fair Oaks Ranch, Texas, but it's very close to San Antonio.
Wonderful. Will you begin by just sharing a little bit with us about what branch of service you served in, your date of birth, if you will, and then we'll go ahead and begin just a little bit of background about when you joined the service.
I served in the United States Army for approximately 26 and a half years. I was born in McCall, Idaho, and I grew up in a little town of 125, 11 miles away. Now, I was born in the doctor's office because there was no hospital for over 100 miles. So up in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains, we were up in a high valley there. My father, Cecil Oatney, was a diesel mechanic for a local logging operation, and my mother, Eileen, was a housewife. My dad served in the United States Navy during World War II in the Pacific area of operations. He was very patriotic. I had a half-brother, Richard Gilbert, who served in the United States Navy approximately 12 years. My two sisters had no desire to go in the military. They and my mother, probably even to this day, don't have a real good understanding of what it really means to be in the military. Just kind of their way of doing things. So I graduated from high school in 1974, and I went to Idaho State University to get an accounting degree. Well, I was soon approached to join a women's military drill team, which was an auxiliary to the Reserve Officer Training Corps unit. And I'm going to start saying ROTC because it's hard to say Reserve Officer Training Corps. And soon after I joined the drill team, then one of the cadre officers approached and said, take the course. It's a humanities credit. And I did. And I liked it. And so I stayed for the 4 years I was in college. It was a little different because I was the only female in my class, and I was the first female to be commissioned from Idaho State University the same day I graduated with my accounting degree in 1978. At that time, I left and I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia. I'd never been very far out of Idaho. So it was very different. When we flew across the Appalachian Mountains, I'm looking for mountains. I didn't see any mountains that looked like the Rocky Mountains, that looked like hills. But anyway, I got to Fort Gordon, Georgia. I made some lifelong friends there, and I still converse with many of them today. So I was assigned to the Signal Corps. And so I got to learn lots and lots about communication. Signal Corps comprises 3 different elements. You have a strategic element, which is our big satellites and big communications, things that pass emails, telephone calls, classified information around the world. And then you have a sustaining base, which is the communications on your local base, fort, whatever. And then you have tactical, and that's where we support our combat units when they're deployed. So we got to learn a little bit about all of those as we're going through training. And I then left and went to Bad Kreuznach, Germany for the next 3 years, where I was assigned to the 8th Signal Battalion within the 8th Infantry Division. Now, there weren't too many female officers down in the division level at that time either in combat support positions. So I often found myself alone as a female in the field. Thankfully, I had a battalion commander who gave me the opportunity, and he signed me to an all-male unit to support a combat brigade. So I went out, and thankfully, I had a brigade commander who also gave me that opportunity. Colonel Luck was a great mentor. He eventually became a 4-star general. So it was really wonderful working with him. My last year, I ended up as a logistics officer for our battalion.
And that was while you were still in Germany?
While I was still in Germany.
I'm sort of curious, what was the communication like when you were in Germany with your family, your friends?
So it was very limited, let's say. I ended up purchasing a German Bundespost telephone system in my bachelor officer's quarters. It was a little expensive, but that way I could call home once a month, and my parents could call me, which probably was about once a month, because again, it was very expensive to call overseas at that point in time. So it was mostly by snail mail letters.
Thank you for that.
So in 1982, I started my advanced course. Again, I got to meet a lot of my friends from the basic course. And then from there, I left and went to Fort Hood, Texas, along with a promotion to captain. So initially when I got to Fort Hood and I went to the 2nd Armored Division, I was assigned to work with the G3 Operations Division. And I walked in when I was being introduced to everybody, and the G3 officer looked up, the full colonel, and said, "Good God, a female and a signal officer at that."
Oh my goodness.
So that was my introduction. However, when I left a year later, he said those exact same words and then said, "Gentlemen, she gave you a run for your money." So it was a great time. I got to learn about all of the different communications that each of the combat arms units used. And then I went to take over my company, Charlie Company, 142nd Signal Battalion. I still supported pretty much the same individuals that I'd been out doing a different job with as I went out in Fort Hood. Wonderful. I love being with soldiers. They are fun. They are sometimes a pain, but for the most part, absolutely love command. It was very hard to give up command after 18 months. I got the opportunity back to Colonel Luck. He had suggested that I ask for graduate school when I finished my company command. So I did. I like math. So I went to Colorado School of Mines for an operations research systems analysis. That doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but let me just tell you that solving problems with very high level math. But my professor, Dr. Woolsey, he didn't believe in just teaching theory. He wanted practical applications. So we were actually inside the mineral economics department. So I got to learn about rocks and petroleum at the same time. So in 1987, I graduated with a degree in Master of Science in Mineral Economics with a focus on the operations research systems analysis.
Good for you.
But then I had to pay the Army back, because for every year they send you to school, you owe them 3. So I was then sent to Fort Baker, California. That's on the opposite end of the Golden Gate Bridge that everybody thinks about. It's on the Sausalito side, very liberal town for us military, very different. But the bridge was on Fort Baker in one part, so we got to run under it all the time. I actually got to run over it one time. And that was a very different assignment. Recruiting command is different from the rest of the Army, because you're now working with civilians, trying to entice them to join the military. So it's a very different job. Now, I wasn't actually having to do the recruiting. I was assigned as the missioning and marketing officer for the brigade. That meant that my team, we looked out there, we determined what the population of high school students was in all the different locations. We had 9 battalions that we supported. We determined how the recruiters should be spread based upon that population. And then every quarter I assigned mission. That meant I gave them their quota they had to make. I wasn't the most liked person within the brigade a lot of times because of that mission. But anyway, it was an interesting time. I had a good time out there, but it was a lot of hard work, and it was very different from what I had been doing. In 1989, although I was selected to promotion to major, it hadn't happened yet, but I also got to attend the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So it was an interesting time because we were studying how we were going to repel the Russians when the Soviet Union decided to break through the wall at West Germany when the wall came tumbling down. Needless to say, our second semester, a lot of courses got changed. So I finished from there and I got sent back to Germany, which I absolutely love. This time I went to Worms, Germany, to 5th Signal Command, which was an Army level command. Side note, I got to re-meet my future husband there. We had known each other 12 years prior at the basic course, but I was assigned, we were in the midst of trying to start the drawdown of the US footprint in Europe. I mean, we were 495,000 just Army at that time stationed in Europe. And that didn't count the spouses and children. So we were drawing them down drastically. Now, my job was not to determine the signal units that were drawn down. My job was to determine, as they started identifying locations that were to be closed and returned to the host government, what did it do to the communication system that the military, and it was a joint system between the Air Force and the Army that we had put up with large microwaves throughout Europe. And so often I had to say, we need to put a fence around this location because we can't tear this one down, because if you want to communicate like to Grafenwehr, which was our training area, I still have to have this location to pass traffic through. So it was an interesting time. Now, at the same time, Desert Storm, Desert Shield was happening. And so we were deploying lots of units throughout Germany. 7th Corps pretty much deployed in force. We deployed a number of units out of 5th Signal Command. And while they were gone, I was also working on repositioning some of the, I had to reposition one battalion that was scattered throughout Germany. So I actually moved them, their spouses and kids and equipment to a location while they were still deployed. And then I was trying to determine with the Department of Army where another unit went. And it came down to the last day when I was going, I need to know which ship to put the equipment on. Is it going to Fort Lewis, Washington, or is it going to Fort Gordon, Georgia? Well, most of the equipment made it to Georgia, other than 2 pieces that managed to get to Fort Lewis. But so it was an interesting time as we were doing that. So after a year and my engagement, my husband left and went to Command and General Staff College, or I should say my fiance, at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, while I went to Italy. I was stationed at Camp Darby, which is halfway between the port of Livorno and the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
And what year was it? What year was it at this point?
This was the end of 1990, 91. So I love Italy. It's an interesting country. They're very, very friendly. Thankfully, I was up in Tuscany area, which is my favorite. Our sister battalion from the Italians was in Firenze, i.e. Florence. Love Florence, one of the best places there is to go visit. Anyway, it was a fun time. I was the executive officer for the 509th Signal Battalion. We were scattered between Camp Darby and across Italy in Vicenza. Now, during that year that I was there, I kind of realigned our battalion and did away with my job. Part of that drawdown stuff. And so they decided to send me back to Germany. So I went back to Heidelberg, Germany. My husband went, because we were married at this time. We got married while he was in Kansas and I was in Italy. Have to be married before the Army will assign you together. So we spent 8 months apart after our wedding. He went to Wiesbaden. Now, as the assignment officer said, well, we did get you to Germany. And it's like, yeah, but that's 75 miles apart. So for 3 months, I drove that 150 miles. Thank God for the Autobahn speeds. Wind that car up and let it go. So anyway, I became the executive officer for the Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff, Information Management within the United States Army Europe headquarters. That meant that any paperwork from Fifth Signal Command, our offices, a lot of different things, it had to go through me, both for content and for format before it went up to the headquarters. So it was a fun job. I did that for 2 years. I moved up there in 1992. And I did that until 1994. And then I was sent to Mannheim, Germany, to become the Deputy Brigade Commander for 2nd Signal Brigade. Now, as I moved to Mannheim, my husband moved to Heidelberg with the 5th Corps headquarters. We never could quite get assigned together. So 2nd Sig Brigade had both a strategic and a sustaining base mission. We had 7 battalions and a little bit of tactical, not much. But we had the big communications that anything in Europe, even coming out of the Mediterranean, it all came through our big strategic systems, and then we would move it stateside. So we had a big mission going on. Well,
What would you say during that time was one of the most challenging aspects?
we moved to Bosnia.
Uh-huh.
That became the next operation. So we sent forces into Bosnia. My husband was the second plane that left and landed in Hungary for part of the headquarters forward. We sent personnel out of our brigade, 5th Signal Command, lots of different units that went into Bosnia at that time. So again, you're bringing all that communication home, either to their home bases or you're moving it to the Pentagon. We had an interesting thing happen one day. My husband got the deputy that was down there with them at the headquarters. He was insistent that this email hadn't got through to the Army Chief of Staff back in the Pentagon. Well, it was nighttime, and we kept saying the email's there, but he wasn't positive. But so, I mean, we had people at every level checking that this email had gone from Kazar, Hungary, and that it was sitting, we got the general's aide up. It was sitting in his mailbox waiting to be read. So you have some interesting times there when the phone's ringing, but nobody's answering. So that was one of our biggest, but you have to have all that communication going constantly. You have to
Absolutely.
have redundant systems. But beyond that, we were picking up the missions of our tactical brigade that deployed. We had to pick up a lot of their missions that they did when they were back in Germany. So you're kind of doing double duty of those that go deployed, those that stay back. You're in there supporting, but it's in a different type of manner.
Well, and I think communications is so important. I mean, battles have been won and lost based on communication. I think a lot of people don't think about that.
Absolutely. If they can't talk on that radio or that telephone, they'll be calling for that signal officer. So I then came out on the lieutenant colonel's list, and I was promoted. Unfortunately, I thought I was going to beat my husband because they did something that they call frocking. That means that you're on the list, but you don't get paid, but you get to wear the rank. But he still got promoted a month ahead of me. But anyway, then in 1996, I got selected to command a battalion. And so, and that was when, this has now been 4 years since we got married. And I had told my husband when we got married, I am not changing my name until the battalion command list comes out. Because files have been known to get lost. And I didn't want to cause anything that would cause a file to go missing. So he understood that. So as soon as battalion command list came out, I submitted paperwork to change my name. So, which totally confused a lot of people in Germany because they've now known me for 5 years there under one name, and I just changed it on them. They're like, you weren't supposed to change it till you moved. And I said, no, I needed it changed before I got there. So in 1996, Gina and I both moved to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I took command of the 504 Signal Battalion, a very unique battalion, only one of its kind at that time. Had no motor pool. I owned no vehicles, no weapons, no tactical gear, but I had a tool room that people salivated over because our job was to go out and build big satellites or refurbish satellites, to put in local area networks or wide area networks. We put in a lot of classified systems for the Pentagon, the White House, the alternate White House. We had some high level things that we did, but anywhere from 40 to 60% of my battalion was deployed at some point. So I got to travel to go see my battalion. So it was a fun time moving. And again, I love command. Absolutely love command. Now, I told you I had no motor pool or any of that stuff. 1 year later, halfway in my command, I had totally changed my battalion to a tactical battalion. Motor pool, tents, weapons, everything. And we had absorbed 2 companies that was in the brigade that I was assigned to. One, they did all the maintenance on our communications equipment, our classified equipment, plus I also had a logistics center, which was unusual for a battalion to have its own logistics center. And then I also had a cable company. Now you have to understand something about the cable company. Test very high on their tests when they're entering the service. That kind of says where they would best be fitted. So, I mean, great workers. They'll give you 110%. But they're also the guys, if it's raining, that you have to say, I need you to change your socks. I mean, I'm not kidding, literally. And after their part of the mission's done, which is literally humping cable from one rig to another or one location to another, they don't have a lot to do. Cable dogs get bored. And they can think of things that you're just sitting there going, how did your brain even conceive that that was possible? Love them to death, but they were a challenge. But soon after they become part of my battalion, I deployed most of that company to Bright Star in Egypt. Not a place that I really want to visit again. It's pretty much a dirty location. I will give that one a pass. I didn't really enjoy my time going there. So So then I had to give up command. Battalion commander basically had to drag me out of there. After 2 years, you have to give up command. My husband was currently in command still, so we still had 1 more year at Fort Huachuca. So I was assigned to the 9th Army Signal unit at Army level, big headquarters, in charge of all the communications that the Army does. And I was their current operations officer. Now,
Where was that at?
this is still at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Okay. Now, we were still in Bosnia. We ended up deploying some personnel to Kuwait because Saddam Hussein was acting crazy again. So we deployed forces that direction. Oh, we went into Kosovo during this time. So we deployed more forces that way. Hurricanes were happening down in the Pacific, in the Caribbean. So we deployed forces out there to support those operations. It was a busy time in the current operations. Now, the most interesting thing that happened during that time was one evening, 5 o'clock, a couple of my guys come running in going, "Ma'am, you got to come see this." Now, they were monitoring the network. This was when cybersecurity and information assurance was not really known by very many people. So I go in there and they have captured a document. It was called the Melissa virus or the I love you virus. When you opened it up, it was nothing but porn. Porn. And so I'm sitting there going, they're going, "What do we do?" And I said, "You have to shut the network down." I mean, the entire Army network. Not one of those things you really want to do, but we had to shut it down or we were going to be shut down because of this virus. And so thankfully, like I said, it was 5 o'clock in Huachuca. So Germany was basically already asleep. The East Coast was basically already asleep. So other than the night personnel and the Pacific, pretty much everything was locked down. So there weren't too many complaints. And it didn't take us that long to then call everybody and strip those I love you messages out of the system. And we put it all back up. And we only had like 3 computers affected within the Army network. But it was a little bit of a tightening of my belt, as I said, shut that down. And you kind of wondered if I was going to get that next promotion or not. So in 1999, left to go to Fort McNair, DC. And this was for me to attend the War College. And I chose to attend one of the joint war colleges called the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. Wonderful. I mean, instead of going to the Army or any of the services, I would tell anybody to go to a joint war college. It was a great experience working with our sister services, all the different civilians from the different agencies throughout the US government. Had a wonderful time, learned a lot. Now, we had a sister war college on the same location as us. They were the Army War College. Now, they called us the Black and Decker. We called them the House of Lords. They called us Black and Decker because we were focused on industry. How do you support the national strategy? That was what we said. Our class's motto was, "A strategy without resources is a hallucination." Because if you don't have the people or the things to support you, you're not going anywhere. But I focused the second semester, you get to focus on one of 20 industries, and I chose space. Space because one, the communications, we use a lot of satellites for a lot of our systems. And so we worked on satellites, we did a lot of things. Got to see a lot of different agencies around the DC, Virginia area that have some touch on space, to include the mapping agency, very interesting place. And then we went to Cape Canaveral, we went down to Kennedy Space Center. We got to climb a tower with a rocket in it, 300 feet in the air. We were up on top of that baby.
Wow.
It was fun. Got to see one of the shuttles, actually got to go into one of the shuttles. It was a good one. We went out to Vandenberg Air Force Base out in California, got to see the F-22 Raptor aircraft that was being built. And we went to an unnamed location in Denver for some things that they were doing, a project that I later got to sit over. And we went out to Colorado Springs and got to see the drone operations that were happening, different areas. It was a wonderful study to be able to do, and actually was very good for me, because when I left from the War College, I went to the Pentagon, had stayed away from there forever. Now, I got assigned to the Office of the Secretary of Defense in Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. I was working international cooperation. I'm not an acquisition person, but I got to sit, my job was to review every major acquisition project, didn't care about which service it was, and to ensure that we were looking at interoperability between the US and our allies. Now, during this time frame, 9/11 happened. I thankfully was on a plane the day before. I flew to Hawaii the day before. My husband flew to Germany. So we weren't there when it happened. It was a little hard because you're away. You couldn't get through on the telephone lines for ages. You didn't know what part of the Pentagon had been hit. Whether your friends were part of it or not. So it took a while for me to get back to my boss. I finally got a hold of him. And because I had made the office do a recall roster, even though they were civilians prior to 9/11, he was able to call everyone and make sure they were safe. Because our office, we were scattered throughout the Pentagon all the time. We were not just sitting in our office. We were at meetings all over the place. So when it hit, one, he wasn't in the office and everybody else was scattered. So he had to phone them to make sure. And that was one of the biggest problems after 9/11, because it's such a heavy civilian organization at the Pentagon. They didn't have a means of calling these individuals at home to try to figure out who was and who wasn't missing. Secretary Rumsfeld immediately mandated that every office would have a recall roster. But anyway, 9/11 had happened. Now, our daughter had already gone into the service in 1998. So she was an air defense artillery officer. And so she deployed when we went to Iraq, and she made the march to Baghdad. First time we have ever done a air defense artillery at her level. She was the big Patriot missiles that either shoot down other missiles or shoot down airplanes. Well, unfortunately, their unit shot down a British plane. So this is one of the things that I was working on. I worked very closely with my British counterparts. Either they came to the United States or I went to London every couple months. We were working 12 projects of interoperability. And that was one of the things we were working on, is the aircraft identify friend or foe so that we don't have those type of problems with our allies, and a lot of other things. I actually wrote non-concurs for our secretary to write to two services, one the Air Force and one the Army. The Air Force had just invited me down to a conference where we had all these allies, and they had briefed this smart bomb, and all the allies wanted to get involved with it. And then they sent me paperwork that said the allies weren't eligible to work on this. And I'm going, not smart to invite me to a meeting and then send me this paperwork. Now, they were really good about fixing that immediately. The Army, they were a little problem. I went to the meeting and I overheard one guy say, well, I think we should only do the bare minimum of what we have to get this okay. And I said, well, then I'm out of here because I'm the one that wrote that letter. So they quickly changed their minds and they worked a little bit better on that one. But that was what my major job was making sure that we were looking for interoperability. Now, also during that time, besides working closely with the British, I worked with what we call the five power. That's the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy, and the individuals at my level. And it came around because every 6 months we moved to a different country. Well, it finally came around to, it was the US term. I gave them like 5 different options of where we might go to, and they chose San Antonio. So we got to come to San Antonio, and it was a fun time to host them here for a meeting and everything. But it was a great time, great experience. I spent 4.5 years at the Pentagon. I retired on the 1st of February, 2005, rank of full colonel. And when I had told a couple of my friends that I was going to retire then, they said, we came in on the same day, we're going out on the same day. So even though we weren't in the same location, the 3 of us retired on the exact same day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so then I went to work for a defense contractor. And it was in support of the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program under Senator Lugar. It was to our area. I was the program manager for the contractor side, where we were developing what kind of sensor equipment, fencing, a limited automation equipment, so they weren't counting for their nuclear weapons by stubby pencils, of the Russian nuclear weapons that supposedly were destined for elimination. We kind of think a lot of it got for hopefully all of the nuclear weapons. A lot of people would ask me, why are we spending money to support the Russians on their nuclear weapons? If you saw their infrastructure, you would understand why we thought nuclear weapons would walk away. And so from my perspective, yes, we needed to do that. Now, it was very different from me, because here I started as a lieutenant on the West German border where we thought the Soviet Union was going to come through. I never thought I'd step foot in Russia. And for 5 years, I went to Russia every 2 months. Very different working for them. Because I was a retired officer, they considered me a spy, because that's what their retired officers are. So I always knew where I'd be in a hotel. I would be in a back area by the stairwell, 2 doors down, because there was a listening post beside me every single time. I mean, it just, you had to get used to it. It was something that, I knew they probably went through my room. Most of the time they were pretty good about not messing it up. Sometimes it was very obvious that they'd been through your stuff. But it was very different, very different. I think a lot of the individuals that I was working with, they really wanted to work with them, but they were handicapped. It was still very top driven, and they could not make decisions, even the colonels at their level. It was
your experience and training that you had in the military, I think was a perfect background for you going into that role.
It was a different world. It was an interesting one. Besides being in Moscow, and while I was in Moscow, I got to have a tour of the Kremlin. I mean, that was fantastic. I got to go see Swan Lake at the Bolshoi Theater, which was also good, even though I was in the nosebleed section. And then I got to visit some sites up in Murmansk, which is up in the Arctic Circle, and up at Kamchatka, which is the entire way across Russia, many, many time zones. As you fly all the way there, and then you fly all the way back, because everything has to go in and out of Moscow. I got to see some different things that I never thought I would ever see. And then we decided it was time to head back to Idaho. My mother was still alive. And so we wanted to spend some time with her. So in 2010, we moved to Idaho, and we spent lots of time there, did some more skiing, a lot of snow. We would have like about 160 inches a year. I had a tractor, but it would still take me about an hour to plow every time it snowed, and it snowed daily. So we stayed there until 2021. And we decided that maybe we wanted something a little bit warmer. And so Gene, even though he had been a Navy brat, he had graduated high school from Texas. I'd spent time in Texas. We decided that this would be a great place to retire to. And so we're here. We're involved in the local American Legion. He's joined the Veterans of Foreign Wars unit that's here, and we're enjoying our time.
Wow, what a fascinating experience you had through the years with tremendous education opportunities and travel. Is there one thing that you would identify as being the best experience you had in your time in service?
It's friends. I mean, it's definitely friends. We have a group of us, started out at 20. We're unfortunately down to 16, but every year we get together somewhere. We meet. Now, we hope it's not funerals. We hope it's a better event, but we always take time to go somewhere together. I mean, it was the people. It really was the people. The travel was a nice thing on the side, but the people was what made me stay in the military.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Cecilia, for taking the time to share such a nice chronological order of your experience, your time in service, and your contribution to serving our country. Thank you so much for taking time to interview with us today and for what you've done. And like I said, your contribution, you and your husband both.
Well, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
We're now hoping, I've got a grandson and a grandson-in-law that are now in the Army to continue on our service, because our daughter's now retired along with her husband. And so the grandsons are taking up the mantle.
That's awesome. And now your interview will be recorded in the Library of Congress American Folklife Center for Posterity. So thank you for sharing your perspective, your experience, and your time in service.
Thank you. I appreciate your time here.
Monica and Cease, thank you both for joining us and for giving us the opportunity to truly honor the veterans in our lives. I hope that all of you ladies will take this information back to your clubs and encourage them to come and watch this video on the NFRW website, because every one of your clubs can get involved and participate in this project, because we all have veterans that we love in our lives, and every single one of them can be interviewed and submitted to the Library of Congress. So I encourage you to please get involved and do that, so that we have those memories for years and years to come, for these members that have done so much for our country. And if you enjoyed today's Empower Hour Veterans Day special, please join me next month on Tuesday, December 13th, when we discuss what can be in 2023. Until then, it was great seeing you all, and let me know if you have any suggestions for our next Empower Hour. Goodbye.
Thank you.